What's happening? What's happening? Peace. Peace to the fam. Share Lafayette Niche, brother Sutek. We black at you again on Kofi Pie TV, Kofi Pie Research Team. I'm gonna make this brief. I'm not going to do anything extensive. I'm not going to take up a lot of y'all time. It's probably gonna be under an hour. I just do not feel that this topic deserves extensive detail, because this is something that I thought that we should all know by now. You know what I'm saying? Within this small community of people who are into African and African American research on our history and culture, I felt like that this would be something that would be a given, that we should already know this by now. But I guess I take certain information and perspectives for granted. So what we gonna do is I'm gonna play a little quick music selection for y'all. Let a couple more people get in. Give me time to be able to share the show. Hopefully, y'all will be sharing the show as well and liking the show. Try to share it in a couple of groups. We gonna get it in real quick and shut it down. What was said was Africans sold their own people. Now, we should know that by now. We should know better than that, right? But I'm just gonna play a couple of videos and read a couple of articles and let the people speak for themselves. Um, it's just crazy that we got to go through this, but yeah, be right back, y'all. Like the show and share the show. All right, I don't think it's playing. I don't think it's playing. And I don't even know if y'all hear me. Y'all press 1 in the chat. Press a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. Trying to get this OBS set up, man. Guess I got to do a little more tweaking. Okay, y'all can hear me. Y'all just ain't hear the music. That's cool. That's cool. Appreciate it, man. Make sure y'all like the show. Make sure y'all share the show. We're gonna get into it. What I'm gonna do is play the disclaimer real quick, and we'll get into the first video. It's crazy that we gotta discuss this. That this has to be reiterated, and what I've said before is that talk like that, ideologies and worldviews like that, take us back, steps back, decades. It take us decades back, yo. And what I mean is intellectually, we, at least in this small community, um, I don't refer to Kofi Pasi Research Team, the Monster Warrior Clan, being part of the conscious community, but in this realm of information, this is something that should have been already obsolete. When you say things like that, you take us decades back in the past instead of advancing forward. Is very tragic. When you look at the world and history from a westernized 21st century perspective, you say things like this. And when you don't want historical context, when you reject cultural and historical context, these are the type of statements that you make. And it's disheartening. Yeah, I probably gotta take it out of my headset. But yeah, peace everybody, man. Peace, Pure from West Africa. See Sean in here, Teddy, Brother DeMar, everything's everything. Brother Lamar, Infinite Minds, Brother Ed. Yeah, peace everybody, man. Yeah, so I'm gonna play this disclaimer real quick and we'll get into it. It's crazy, man. That shit that white folks say. So copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Crazy as hell if you think I'm finna speed read through all that. But YouTube, you see it. You know what I'm saying? So this is my brother home team history. Another disclaimer is I do not agree with all of this brother's views, but as far as this video, I feel like he pretty much did a great job of dissecting this misconception. So let's get into it.
Well, this is your boy Home Team here. I'm back at it with another video of African history, culture, and worldview. And today we're going to talk about the Atlantic slave trade and the fallacy of blacks selling blacks. So I actually did this video a while back and I actually deleted it so that I can create a new one that was a little more in depth. And a lot of people have actually been asking me to, remake this video pretty much. And so here it is. So initially I thought I would never do a video on this because, I already thought that, people knew so much about the Atlantic slave trade. Boy, was I wrong. The historical perspective on this topic has literally been murdered and adulterated nearly in totality. Like, nobody has any idea what went down. And other people tend to take bits and pieces of information just to make a point and take it completely out of context. So, of course, when people talk about this topic, they tend to say, well, black people sold other black people, right? And so they leave feeling vindicated as if this statement.
That is exactly what was said from over there. Black people sold other black people. She sold black people. She sold her own folks. That was the sentiment. Now I could go back and play this, but it's been so many conversations in these videos. It's like 8-9 hours long. If it's a situation where I am challenged to show and prove that this was said, I have no problem with that. But I'm pretty sure all y'all heard that. I'm pretty sure all y'all caught that. Because some of y'all same ones that be over here in this chat be over there in that chat too. So if you're paying attention to what was said, this was said not one time, not two times, but multiple times by multiple of them people over there.
Statement is some sort of trump card. Okay, so the problem with this statement is that it's disingenuous to begin with. Here's why. You can't take a 20th century mindset and apply it to 16th and 17th century people. It simply doesn't work like that. There was no black power or pan-Africanism back then. Like, black people didn't become black until they came to the new world. They shared a similar culture, they shared a similar experience, and they began to speak the same language. That's when they became black people. For example, in Western Africa alone, there are thousands of different ethnic groups who speak a different language, have different cultures, and have completely different worldviews and religions. So, why in the world would they view each other as the same when they don't even speak the same language? I find it interesting that people are willing to accept the differences between Europeans and Asians, but when it comes to Africans, they all of a sudden want to paint one broad stroke and completely ignore the diversity. For example, when the Romans pretty much went into Northern Europe and were raping and pillaging the entire region, nobody ever then goes and looks at that history and says to themselves, wow, look at all these white people brutalizing other white people. The Romans even made slaves out of their Northern European counterparts, like the Germanic tribes, the people of Hispania, and the Celts themselves, aka other white people. Now, given that history, you'll never hear a soul say, wow, look at all these white people selling other white people into slavery. What a crime. Well, why don't you hear people say that? Well, because people understand and respect the historical differences and the historical perspectives and the diversity of that region and of those people. The Romans and the Greeks seem to have made it very clear that these pink-skinned northerners were not like us. Marcus Cicero, hailed by historians as one of Rome's greatest orators, had this to say about Northern Europeans, specifically from Britain. It has been ascertained, too, that there is not a scrap of silver in this island, nor any booty, except from slaves. But I don't fancy you will find any literary or musical talents among them. Or let's take, for example, Strabo, one of the Western world's most adored Greek philosophers. He makes his opinion of Northern Europeans pretty clear. In reference to the natives of Northern Europe, he has this to say, and I quote, "The home of men who are complete savages and lead a miserable existence because of the cold."
I'm Nick Nimmin, and I'm a StreamYard user.
Are you getting the point yet? Are you getting the point yet? These people did not look. These folk were surrounded by black people. So when you say black, she sold black people. What kind of sense does that make? They didn't have no we all African type of ideology. In those times, the distinction was made by culture. They were surrounded by black folks. What other way would they distinguish themselves from one another? Culture. What does specific culture give you? Specific ethnicities. So these ethnic groups, some people may call them tribes. This is the way they distinguish each other from their neighbors. As you heard, you don't hear white folks saying, oh, white folks enslave other white folks. I'm gonna keep it funky with you. One reason why I want to this shouldn't take no extensive detail to get into, but another reason is because, man, I'm trying to hurry up and watch so I can get on Game of Thrones. I've been watching Game of Thrones on the second season. Even watching this show, if you paying attention, you see the distinction. They didn't say, oh, we all white folks. Now, these northerners, these folks from Winterland and these folks from King's Landing, like, we ain't the same. I don't fuck with them. So what makes you think that black people in sub-Saharan Africa had the same worldview as you have over here as a 21st century American?
Consistent barbarian narrative the Romans perpetuated about Northern Europeans. These mean-spirited quotes were a very common theme when it came to the opinion of Northern Europeans in general from their southern neighbors. And of course, this was propaganda, but the point is that these Romans and Greeks clearly saw themselves as not only superior, but inherently different from the pink-skinned savages of the north. Thus, it justified Romans enslaving Northern European ethnic groups, aka white people selling and buying other white people. This, of course, from our 20th century mindset. But for some reason, when it comes to Western Africa, we all of a sudden develop amnesia and forget proper historical perspectives in favor of advancing the whole black on black crime narrative, if you will. How convenient. Well, why is this black on black crime narrative so convenient? Well, because nobody ever says white on white crime or Asian on Asian crime. It's a disingenuous, deflective argument to begin with. And it's very important that we understand that. You see, the truth is all violence matters. So what is the underlying premise of this whole black people selling other black people idea? Well, people who use this adulterated logic are really trying to say, your people did this to themselves. We brought about this bad slavery thing. The problem, once again, is this 21st century or this 20th century blanket logic framework. That's the problem. The thing is, there was no we. It was always Fulani versus Mandinka, Songhai versus Maasai, Mbundu versus Bakongo. All these people saw themselves as inherently different, just as much as the Romans saw the Celts and the Germans as other. So now that we're scholars now and we truly understand that we can't take a 20th and 21st century logic and apply it to 16th and 17th century people, let's really try and understand what actually happened. So let's talk about the nature of slavery in West Africa itself. No matter your 21st century morality level, which was in all likelihood attained via historical hindsight, slavery is not just slavery. In other words, there were different kinds of slavery throughout the world, and slavery in West Africa was overwhelmingly in the context of what some may alternatively describe as domestic servitude, in which slaves would work primarily in the house of the master and retain some freedoms. Domestic slaves in many cases would even be considered part of their master's family. In some cases, even slaves had slaves themselves. The slaves could own the profits from their labor, whether in land or in products, and could marry and pass the land on to their children in many cases. To understand the nature of slavery in Africa, let's look at one of the longest lasting empires in West African history, the Mali Empire. So what was their decree on slavery? Well, the Mali Empire, like most empires around the world, participated in slavery. They even had a constitution called the Korakon Foga that regulated it. The Korakon Foga declares the following: "Do not ill-treat the slaves. We are the master of the slave, but not the bag he carries." So basically, this is a federal mandate of the Mali Empire and further proof of the humane treatment of slaves in West Africa. Testament to this humane treatment within Mali is the fact that Mansa Sakura was actually a slave before he became king of the Mali Empire. That's pretty significant. So at bare minimum, this ideology of slavery was enforced throughout the empire from at least the 13th century all the way to the 17th century. So the question then becomes, how did you become a slave in West Africa? Well, there are two things. It depends on the socio-political atmosphere of the given region and your social status. For example, most people became slaves through warfare. The overwhelming majority of slaves were war captives between rivaling ethnic groups. And when you add religion in the mix, it gets even more complex. Take, for instance, the most renowned scholar of Timbuktu, the Songhai scholar Ahmed Baba. He pretty much helped us define who could legitimately enslave other people and who could legitimately be enslaved themselves within the Songhai Empire. The opinion of Ahmed Baba went on to shape the attitudes of Muslim West Africans on the legitimacy of enslavement and the permissibility of trading in slaves. He literally goes on to list a few ethnic groups he deemed as enslavable. Whoever now comes to you from the group called Maasai or Gurma or Busa or Borgu or Dagamba or Kotokoli or Yoruba or Tonbogu or Bobo or Karmu, all of these are unbelievers remaining in their unbelief until now. And thus their enslavement was legitimate. Now notice Ahmed Baba, being the intelligent Songhai man that he was, notice he didn't say some Songhai people can be enslaved. It's important, based on our discussion, that we realize how he completely left out his own ethnic group, which of course was the Songhai. As wicked as this may sound, it was clear that there were rules when it came to slavery and who can be enslaved. Let's go to another region to find out what slavery meant from their perspective. Let's look southward toward the Congo Empire. King Mvemba of the Congo became increasingly frustrated with the Portuguese because they were illegally acquiring slaves. Mvemba literally wrote a letter to the Portuguese king saying, "Each day the traders are kidnapping our people, children of this country, sons of our nobles and vassals, even people of our own family. This corruption and depravity are so widespread that our land is entirely depopulated. We need in this kingdom only priests and school teachers and no merchandise, unless it is wine and flour for mass. It is our wish that this kingdom not be a place for the trade or transport of slaves. Many of our subjects eagerly lust after Portuguese merchandise that your subjects have brought into our domains. After having taken these prisoners to the coast secretly or at night, as soon as the captives are in the hands of white men, they are branded with a red-hot iron. Now, the Congo Empire participated in slavery way before their interaction with the Portuguese, and at Portuguese request for slaves, they would give them their war captives from different ethnic groups. King Mvemba had a problem because the Portuguese were illegally seizing Congo's citizens. In other words, his own people. Thus, Mvemba obviously was not going to be complacent in that and shut it down. Ultimately, Alfonso, or King Mvemba, decided to establish a special committee to determine the legality of the enslavement of those who were being sold. Why? Because his own people were being caught up in it. This is pretty much how you became a slave in West and Central Africa. You were either a war captive from a rivaling ethnic group, you were a repeated offender, you committed a heinous criminal act, you were in debt, or simply both your parents died. The type of slavery that we are accustomed to here in the Americas is chattel slavery, which is the very worst type of slavery, involving the dehumanization of people. So now the question becomes, why was slave trading so rampant in West and Central Africa? How did this all start? Well, Upper West Africa was a little more stable because they had huge empires started by the Soninka, Mandinka, and the Songhai. These were the empires of Wagadu, Mali, and Songhai. But after these empires fell, the region was totally destabilized, and ethnic groups were free to form their own hybrid kingdoms. These newly formed hybrid kingdoms thrived solely in the context of survival, leading to war and dysfunction throughout the region. Due to the domestic instability throughout the region, the arrival of foreign goods, services, and political prowess disembodied the many kingdoms present. Thus, a new culture developed, allowing for sustainability through slave trading. Slave trading boosted the economies of these kingdoms, while simultaneously devastating the future development and growth of the region. So, to further drive home this point, let's take a look at actual documented cases of enslaved Africans and how they actually came to be enslaved. And let's see if they were actually sold by their own people. Now, again, I don't mean their own people from a 20th century broad paintbrush sense. I mean their own people from a proper historical perspective sense. Let's look at Ayuba Diallo, who was a Fulani man from Senegal. Ayuba came from a very prominent family in Senegal. Ironically, he and a friend were near the Gambia River to sell one of his Mande slaves and got captured by the Mandinka. The Mandinka shaved his head to make him look like a war captive, hence making it legal, and he was sold in Maryland. Ayuba eventually acquired his freedom because of his intelligence and his wit. Notice, he wasn't kidnapped by the Fulani and sold into slavery by his own people. Why didn't the Fulani capture and sell other Fulani? Well, because that would have been stupid. Now let's take another African into consideration, Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Sarah was a real live African princess of the Yoruba people who was orphaned due to intertribal warfare and sold into slavery. In 1848, the Yoruba were attacked by the Fon people from the kingdom of Dahomey. Sarah lost her parents and became a slave to King Gezo of Dahomey. In a remarkable twist of events, she was liberated from enslavement and became a goddaughter to Queen Victoria, as she took an interest in her due to her exceptional intelligence. So with these two cases, what have we learned? Well, the majority of enslaved people came through warfare specifically war captives, and they were enslaved due to rivaling ethnic groups vying for power. If we are to be genuine scholars, we will realize that these people were not sold into slavery or enslaved by their own people, but by people who obviously viewed them as other. So, why do people persist on simplifying this complex social structure of West Africa? Well, because it's always been easy to disparage and disrespect the culture, the worldview, and the humanity of African people. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you guys want access to full blown African history lessons, you can visit the link down below. It's called
Yeah, so hopefully those that are forming these misconceptions are starting to understand the point. If you would have read volume 2, then you would understand. In my chapter, I tell you that in the times of old, the ideology of or the social construct of race as we have it today is not the same. It was race would have been considered your ethnic group. So just as there was an issue with the place name of Kemet a while back, and some people thought it was the Black Land. Well, why would it be the Black Land? Why would I have to remind myself that I'm black and I'm surrounded by black people? You know what I'm saying? Like, it would have been the same thing. Why would I feel like that these people that practice a different culture but look like exactly like me, why would I feel that they are the same if the distinction is made by culture? You see what I'm saying? Like, yeah, so saying that black people so other black people is null and void. Hey, well, that was a part of the culture. You're talking about 16th, 17th century and beyond, before. So you're still looking at these cultures in a modern lens. So maybe you feel like it's a dirty reason to be enslaved. So what's a good reason to be enslaved? That's crazy. Yeah, home team. Like I said, I don't agree with everything that the brother puts forth, but in this video, I'm with him. I'm with him. So yeah, that makes no sense, Corey. To say black people saw other black people, that makes no sense, bro. You don't hear white people say that. You know why? Because they understand the historical and cultural context. So when you don't want that historical and cultural context, when you reject that historical and cultural context, you will be looking like this. You diving right out the window head first. Nobody says that. Nobody says that, bro. So let me. And yeah, we got Azuma. We got a couple of other sources, but I just don't feel the need to pull them motherfuckers out right now. If there's any pushback, if you want to have a further discussion on this, then we can bring out them guns. But this is juvenile, bro. So I just don't. I just didn't feel the need to do that. Yeah, I just didn't feel the need to do that. So I'm gonna drop this in the chat. Anybody want to read it on your own time or whatever? Yeah, but y'all also said Africans sold their own people. Might not have been you specifically, but Chef did say it. Sosa did say it. And they said it multiple times. Multiple times. So Africans did not sell their own people into slavery. Was Africa one nation? Were Africans one people? Were the Europeans in Africa just to trade? If Africans willingly participated in the trade, then why would Europeans bring battle troops and weapons of war all the way from Europe to Africa? Why the so many Europeans against natives wars in Africa and African history? And what were the Europeans fighting for in Africa? Were the European currencies of the day valuable to Africans? Was there a common currency in Africa? Which currency was used to buy slaves in Africa? Did Africans willingly trade shiploads of valuable slaves for just bottles of wine? Does the Bible permit slavery in the slave trade? I don't care about that. Why did the church participate in the slave trade? I'm not worried about that either, but I'm only worried about what we talking about. Even in this modern world, there are wars and rumors of wars almost everywhere you go. There were wars in Europe in those days, and there were wars in America. There were wars almost everywhere in the world. There were tribal wars in Africa too. The difference between the tribal wars in Africa and the wars in the outside world, excuse me, was that in the outside world, the conquered were often butchered due to a highly sophisticated weapons of war used, whereas the conquered in Africa, excluding Arabs and Muslims in the north, became part of the conquered. In other words, while no enemy was left standing on the outside world, the conquered enemies were left to live and serve in Africa. So it is true that there were some slaves, quote unquote, in Africa in those days before the white man came. However, those slaves were not taken purposely to become slaves of another kingdom or empire. They were just victims of tribal wars, and it was somehow better than, excuse me, than that than what was happening on the outside world where no enemy was allowed to live. I read an article online today and I was shocked to read so many people believe Africans sold their own brothers and sisters into slavery just like that. I wanted to comment on the article, but the comment section had been disabled. And this is why I'm making this post to let people know that we Africans, my ancestors, weren't that stupid to have sold their own brothers and sisters into slavery just like that. We were stupid to have allowed ourselves to be manipulated by the foreigners. My people used to refer to the white man as white strangers. So pardon me if you see white strangers in my post. We were stupid to have trusted the white stranger in the first place, and we were stupid to have allowed white stranger into our land. My people allow white strangers onto our land because they, the white strangers, said they come in peace. Before I continue, I am not a historian and do not claim to be one. However, I am an African and I cherish our oral traditions. So this is a continental brother. Uh, I did study history in school, and I was taught by someone who actually knew what he was talking about. In continuation, please note that there are two types of slave trade in Africa. One introduced mostly by the coming of Islam through the Arab raiders and traders in the Middle East and North Africa of the trans-Saharan slave trade, and one introduced by the coming of the Europeans or the transatlantic slave trade. The one I'm talking about, the trans-Saharan slave trade, is deeply rooted in Islamic cultures of several countries in the north, especially Maghreb region or the quote-unquote Berber world. And it's still practiced, although silently, by Muslim-dominant countries such as Mauritania and Libya. And I showed y'all that before. If y'all be watching any of the videos that I do, according to my grandfather, in those days when there were no Christianity and no modern day government systems, in Africa, king, queens, and other traditional rulers ruled their kingdoms as heads of the state and judged cases according to the rules and regulations of the land. Those who disobeyed the laws of the land were punished, and those who obeyed the sacrifices for the land were rewarded accordingly. Although every land had some prison facilities, those prisons weren't meant for large groups of criminals. So those who killed were killed. Those who stole dearly, those who stole paid dearly for it. Those who slept with other people's wives were banished from the land, and children who disobeyed elders were punished accordingly, and so on. Let me see what y'all talking about. All right. My country, Ghana, in West Africa. So the brother in Ghana, probably a Khan. My country, Ghana in West Africa, was a major slave trading post where slaves from different parts of Africa were brought and arranged before shipping abroad. When the white strangers first came to Africa, we, my ancestors, were not sure about their intentions, so most communities drove them away from their land. However, the white strangers managed to convince some of our traditional rulers that they had not come to cause any harm, but just to preach the good news, of course, Christianity, and also to trade with the local people. It was a barter trading. It was barter trading where goods were exchanged for goods. And Sean talked about this the other day. My country, Ghana, was called the Gold Coast because gold was abundant. Although my ancestors valued gold as a precious metal, white strangers valued it more as precious mineral, worth more than blood in some cases. In other words, my ancestors had the gold while the white strangers needed the gold and had to trade things like bottles of wine, clothing, textile, guns, ammunition, etc. for pieces of gold. That was how the trade started. Some of the local chiefs along the coast started accepting white strangers by giving them a place to stay. The white strangers started building missionary centers where they stayed and preached the gospel and also traded with the local people. The white strangers later expanded those missionary centers, including churches and cathedrals, into forts and castles where they packed slaves before shipping them abroad. Yeah, do Elmina ring any bells? The white strangers did not understand the local language of the local people, and the local people did not understand a word the white strangers were saying, so it made communication very difficult. To help break the language barrier, the white strangers went to local rulers and asked the local rulers to give them some of the local people to train so they could speak the foreign language, which would make communication easier. But none of those local rulers were ready to give their people out to go stay with the strangers. Later on, some of the local rulers came up with the idea that instead of killing those criminals, they could actually give those criminals to the white strangers so the white strangers could preach the good news. They they said they came to preach to those criminals, change them into good people, and also train them in the foreign language in order to aid communication, which was better than killing those criminals. So the traditional rulers gave those criminals out to the white strangers to show appreciation. And those white strangers gave gifts like textiles, bottles of wine, mirrors, etc. to the traditional rulers. That was how white strangers got their first local servers. Those local people, the criminals, lived and served the white strangers in the castles and forts and learned the foreign language, which enabled them to serve as mediators, translating the local language for the white strangers. and the foreign language to the local people. This helped a lot in communication. As I mentioned earlier, those local servers living with the white strangers were criminals in the society, and although they served as mediators and made communications a lot easier, excuse me, they also made life a living hell for the local people, some as a form of revenge. For example, when the white strangers sent them to go collect taxes, let's say 5 pieces of gold, those criminals added their own taxes and made it 8 pieces of gold. At times, too, they mistreated just so they could get more power. Some of those criminals even became more powerful than the traditional rulers. In other words, white strangers, after preaching the good news to those criminals, turned them into even far more dangerous monsters than they were before. Why? Because only the white man had guns at the time, and they shot anyone the the criminals considered criminals. Those criminals were few. Those criminals were the few Africans who helped the white strangers to get more slaves. However, don't forget the fact that there were criminals condemned to death in their various societies for being un-African. So, not following these cultures, not following the cultural laws of the land would make you un-African, quote unquote, or whatever ethnic group that you were dealing with. If you, I'm assuming that this brother is a Khan, he may be another ethnic group uh, from Ghana, but if he refused to follow the cultural norms and the laws of the Akan people, then he would not be an Akan person. And there's got to be, there's got to be some type of retribution for that, especially if you're breaking some type of laws, right? The local people The local people living with the white strangers served and worshiped them so well to the point where the white strangers began asking for more because the benefits they derived from those local servers. Some of the white strangers took some local servers with them on their return home. Back home, they found those local servers, the black men from Africa, very useful. They found those local servers very useful and decided to come back for more. They realized that they could use them to work their plantation farms back home and to make more money. They also realized they could sell some of those local servers to their friends and countrymen to make more money. And that was why most of them, the white strangers, but this time around slave traders, returned with the intentions of picking more local servers, this time around slaves. So they returned for slaves, but no local ruler was ready to give them their people out except those criminals. Excuse me. I mentioned earlier on in Prisoners of War, tribal wars. In my country, for example, the Ashantis and those living on the interior parts of the country did not want to have anything to do with the white strangers. In fact, those white strangers set foot on the Ashanti Empire did not return. However, the white strangers needed slaves and more slaves, but there was no easy way of getting slaves in Africa. So what they did was that they created confusion among the various tribes so that there would be more tribal wars and more war prisoners so they could get more slaves. And that was exactly what they did. These Europeans came in and played on the tension that these uh, tribes and kingdoms and nations had with their neighbors. Before the white man came to Africa, tribal wars were mostly fought with swords, spears, bows, and arrows. Although these weapons were lethal, they were nowhere near as quick and fatal as the gun. The problem was that only white strangers had guns and decided which tribal group to support in times of battle. Any tribal group the white strangers supported with their powerful cannons, guns, and ammunition easily conquered their enemies. This also created another major problem. The white strangers did not support any tribal group for free. Of course not. In fact, the white strangers started demanding taxes, which included pieces of gold and prisoners of war, the total submission after victory. and total submission after victory. Any tribal group or community which failed to submit to the Europeans and pay taxes were wiped out. Sometimes the leaders of those communities were executed publicly as a form of warning to the neighboring communities. Most communities in Africa were turned into concentration camps with European authorities in place. Although although not often mentioned in history books, there were well trained and well equipped European troops across sub Saharan Africa, and they fought several battles with native tribes who refused to submit to European authority, and that explains the several Europeans against native wars in the African history. In other words, my ancestors were not ready to give their own brothers and sisters into slavery. In fact, most fought and died in battle just to save their communities from the hands of those white strangers. Rather, the white strangers were the ones who demonically manipulated my people by creating so much confusion between the various tribes and creating so many tribal wars in all efforts to get slaves. In Ghana, for example, because the Ashanti Empire was so powerful to defeat, the white strangers created so much confusion and so many wars between the Ashantis and neighboring tribes. Supplied some of in most cases supplied some of the neighboring tribes with guns to defeat the enable them defeat the Ashantis. I think he had a little typo. The white strangers continued this until they defeat the Ashantis and took away the king of the Ashantis and the queen mother and several others into exile just to break the Ashanti kingdom apart even after slavery so they could colonize and control the Ashanti gold, etc. To conclude, my ancestors did not sell their own brothers and sisters into slavery just like that. They were deceived and demonically manipulated by those white strangers who visited our land. So you got a little more in depth, but basically the point that I'm trying to extract from this is these people did not sell their own people. These people sold prisoners of war. In the very rare case that you find someone selling their own people, that they were criminals. In the rare case that you find a group selling their own people, 9 times out of 10, they were criminals. So when you say these people enslaved their own people, that's a misnomer. Let's see what y'all talking about. I'm not singling out the Fulani. I was making a point to recognize the wrongdoing in my own group. Yeah. Okay. Fula, he was Fula. Gotcha. Give you the cultural context of selling a human is okay. That's not what we talking about right here. We talking about African ethnic groups selling their own people. So yeah, in the cultural context of the westernized 21st century, you would not look at that as okay in any circumstance, right? Understood. We understand that. But we're not talking about 21st century. We're not talking about here and now. We're talking about 16th, 17th century Africa and anything prior. Right. So
Hello everyone, it's Jabbar here. Welcome to episode 5 of Misconceptions. So today I'm going to be talking about the popular belief that
y'all Negroes were selling your own people into slavery?
Oh, hell no. Y'all pale-skinned men come to Africa and kidnap our people and stole everything.
Today I'm going to be tackling both of those misconceptions. The misconception that Africans captured and sold their own people into slavery, and the belief that African slaves all came from European merchants who kidnapped African people from their villages. Also, before I begin, I already foresee a pretty depressing comment section similar to the one I got on my Moors video. And frankly, there isn't really anything I could say or do to prevent that, but guys, this isn't a racial propaganda video. All parties responsible for the transatlantic slave trade are all dead now. Blacks, whites, and Arabs alike. There's no point in demonizing one another just because of the things that people have done in the past, because nobody alive today is responsible for what has happened. Yes, it was a very dark part of our history, and yes, it still has some long-reaching effects to this day. However, I assure you that the overwhelming majority of the people watching this video, black or white, have nothing to do with what's happened in the past. As many of you know, I typically avoid slavery in my videos as it's the dominant theme in the mainstream when it comes to black history, and we hear enough about it already. However, in this particular case, I think that it's necessary to discuss and clear up some of the most toxic misconceptions about slavery, as well as create an entirely new perspective and understanding of the topic. So first we'll cover the belief that Africans were selling other Africans, or blacks were selling other blacks, or however you'd like to word it. Slavery was a fact of life in much of sub-Saharan Africa in pre-colonial times, and not just the international trade to European or Arabic buyers either. Slavery was something that was also practiced intranationally throughout the continent, where African people were bought, sold, and captured within the continent of Africa itself. However, one important thing to note is that African people did not and still do not view themselves as one homogeneous ethnic group.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no, by all means.
What I mean by this is that contrary to the people of Africa, the cultural and ethnic identity that African Americans have is something that is based entirely on race. For example, if someone in the United States has the same physical features as an African, right away they are looked upon as an African American, and are thus classified as belonging to the same ethnic group as those who share those features. Barack Obama is an excellent example. He is considered by most to be the first president of the United States belonging to the African American ethnic group, despite being born to a mother who was Caucasian. This mentality simply does not exist among African people. The criteria to fall within the same ethnic group as another person is significantly more precise and has little to nothing to do with skin color. As with all other human populations throughout Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Americas, Africans come from all walks of life, languages, cultures, and civilizations, and skin color has always had very little to do with their ethnic group. Simply put, being black was not, and still is not, the only criteria for being considered members of the same ethnic group among Africans. In pre-colonial times, it was common for African kingdoms to go to war with one another and sell all prisoners off into the transatlantic slave trade. Such is the case with the Anglophone countries of the Caribbean, with populations that largely descend from Ashanti slaves. This is due to the fact that the Fanti, who were allies of the British, frequently went to war with the Ashanti and sold all of their captives to the British, whom were allied to the Fanti at the time. In fact, the spirit, skill, or organization of these warriors didn't just disappear after they became enslaved, as they were known for being among the most rebellious groups of slaves in the New World, leading highly organized and often successful rebellions against the British. So much so that the British would call them Coromantes to distinguish them from the typical docile slave, a keepsake from Fort Coromantine, where they were shipped from, to the point where a bill was even passed to ban their importation to the Caribbean due to their rebellious reputation. So simply put, if one was to consider this as selling their own people, then the entire history of the world should be rewritten. The oppression against Jews in World War II should be considered whites oppressing whites, despite the fact that we all know very clearly that rivalries between the two groups was more than just skin deep. Pun intended. There is also a common belief that most slaves were primarily acquired by Europeans who simply raided coastal villages and kidnapped captives to take aboard their slave ships. While this was practiced at times by Arabic, European, and African peoples alike, it was a very dangerous operation and often unsuccessful, as the peoples they encountered did not go out without a fight. As I mentioned previously in my video on the Mali Empire, when the Portuguese first attempted to raid the coastal towns and villages along the Gambia in the 15th century, they were continuously defeated and eventually forced to sign treaties with the Empire of Mali, whom had control over the region at the time. This pattern was also seen in the Congo Kingdom. While relations between the Portuguese and the Congo Kingdom began on friendly terms, the Portuguese gradually began to undermine Congo's influence and even capture its citizens as slaves. Previous agreements between the Portuguese and the Congo Kingdom allowed the Portuguese to only capture slaves from places other than the Congo Kingdom. As Portugal saw an increasing demand for labor, they began raiding Congo's villages and towns from within the borders of the kingdom. This was obviously a huge no-no for the Kingdom of Congo, and they strongly resisted this through several wars and conflicts, until eventually the entire kingdom was conquered by the Portuguese in the 17th century. In the majority of cases, it was much more dangerous, expensive, and difficult for Europeans to capture slaves on their own when they could simply just purchase them from markets in African kingdoms, whom acquired their slaves largely through warfare with their neighbors and rivals, rather than kidnapping. So in conclusion, Africans didn't really sell their brothers or sisters or moms or uncles or even their own countrymen into slavery. The belief that all blacks, or all Africans, are one united people is a concept that was invented by white Americans and has come to dominate the culture of the United States to present day. Different races of people from all around the world continuously had rivalries with one another, and their race or skin color was usually the least of their concerns in regards to what led to that rivalry or unity. From the ancient and medieval wars of Europe to the conquests of Genghis Khan, language, culture, religion, power, and trade have always been the bigger driving factors towards ethnic identity, as opposed to race or skin color. Africans were also not captured like wild animals, like popularly portrayed. Of course, small instances of kidnapping people to sell into slavery had happened in Africa and several other places around the world, including coastal Europe by Moorish and Arabic slave hunters. However, the bulk of all captives sold into slavery were done on a massive scale through warfare and rivalries between different ethnic groups. Rivalries that were defined not by race, but by politics and ethnic identity. The whole idea of blackness being associated with being a slave is something that was created in the past few centuries by European and American slave owners. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to check out the new From Nothing community website, where I'll be regularly posting all sources used in my videos. The site also includes a community forum.
Yeah, so I see Brother Corey, you said if it's wrong then, if it's wrong now, it's wrong then. And I'm telling you, you wrong now. That morality is subjective. So what you call moral today in a Western 21st century society, it wouldn't necessarily be the same in 16th, 17th century and pre-colonial Africa. That's not the same, bro. That's not the same. You can't make that comment. Right. Yeah, North Africans are still enslaving West Africans today, right now, as we speak. It ain't never stopped. Look up the SOS movement in North Africa, in Mauritania. I showed this several times. Yeah, so all right, hold on, let me go. We sold each other. We sold each other. Hot damn. We was just out there selling our own folk. Here we sell each other into slavery, misconceptions about the African involvement in the slave trade. Mm. So very often I see comments by people who argue that Africans sold each other into slavery to speak to the slave trade, to speak of the slave trade solely as Africans selling each other is a gross oversimplification of what was a complex historical event. This also seems to be an attempt to shift the burden of the slave trade on the victims of that very trade. You victim blaming. That's basically what he's saying, bro. You you victim blaming. There are many misconceptions about African history, and nowhere is this more true than the topic of the slave trade. Very often I see comments by people who argue that Africans sold each other into slavery. There is some element of truth to this, but to speak of the slave trade solely as Africans selling each other is a gross oversimplification of what was a complex historical event. This also seems to be an attempt to shift the burden of the slave trade on the victims of that very trade and how Europe undeveloped Africa by our brother Walter Rodney. Damn, my eyes is burning. By our brother Walter Rodney, he mentions how the white author of the book on the slave trade, of a book on the slave trade, admitted that he was encouraged by other scholars to blame the slave trade solely on Africans. This narrative helps to lessen European guilt by making Africans seem just as or even more guilty of being involved in the slave trade. This is why I said, bro, when y'all say shit like that, y'all taking us back decades. Y'all taking us back decades and you're using European arguments. This piece is not an attempt to ignore the African role in the slave trade or to absolve those who were involved, but to provide a more complete picture of the African involvement in the slave trade. In the first place, Portuguese initiated what eventually became the transatlantic slave trade, mainly through slave raids along the coast of Africa. The first of these raids came in 1444 and was led by Lancarote. That for the I ain't even finna try, bro. Nice try. The problem with raiding for slaves was that it was extremely dangerous. Yeah, they was snatching up a few of them, but they were getting fucked up out there. For instance, the slave trader Nuno Tristão was killed during an ambush. If you want to know about that, read Zarara, right? Gomez Ains de Zarara, the Portuguese chronicler. Slave raiding proved to be an extremely dangerous way to obtain slaves, but buying slaves was much safer and took less effort on the part of Europeans. Therefore, the first phase of the slave trade began not with a trade, but with a series of raids. This point is especially important because although the slave trade was on some level based on a partnership between European buyers and African traders, the slave trade did not begin as such. Moreover, the partnership between traders and buyers was an uneasy one. The European traders often betrayed those who supplied them with slaves. They always betraying motherfuckers. They don't never keep no agreements or bargains. They don't never hold up their end of the deal. You should have seen that if you've been paying attention to what Sean been giving y'all with Nzinga and the Portuguese. A famous case of this was the African slave trader Daga, who was tricked and captured by slave traders. He was taken to Trinidad, where he would eventually lead mutiny. He led a mutiny. Another example is given by Anne Bailey in her book African Voices in the Transatlantic Slave Trade, and I got that, and I still ain't broke it open yet. That's next up for me. I need to break that open. She mentions the story of Chief Ndorkutsu, who had been providing captives to the European traders. Eventually, some of Homeboy's own relatives were tricked into boarding the slave ship and then taken as slaves to Cuba. In some cases, such as that of Madame Tinubu in Nigeria and Afonso of the Congo Kingdom, those Africans were initially gave African captives to Europeans came to resist the slave trade. Tinubu had a change of heart when she realized how inhumanely the slaves were treated. Now, it's another thing Sean says all the time, bro. At first, they didn't know what was going on. Some of them, once they found out, they continued. Some of them tried to cut that shit off. But we can't overgeneralize, bruh. We can't say everybody did this one thing. That's crazy. In some cases, such as that of Madame Tinubu and Alfonso of the Kingdom, those Africans initially gave African captives to Europeans to resist the trade. Tinubu had a change of heart when she realized how inhumanely the slaves were treated. Alfonso was almost assassinated by the Portuguese after he demanded an end to the slave trade in his kingdom. Typically, wars in West Africa were relatively short affairs that led to a small number of casualties. The introduction of European weapons made these wars more drawn out and destructive affairs. Moreover, the only way Africans could acquire these firearms was through the trade of slaves. A king of Dahomey once requested that Europeans establish a firearm factory in his nation, but this request went ignored. Firearms became necessary for African nations to defend themselves, both from the African rivals as well as the European intrusion. But the only way to acquire these weapons was through slave trade. This situation only benefited the competing European powers that were able to play Africans against each other. I just said that. I said they play into the tension and the conflict that these tribes and kingdoms and ethnic groups had with their neighbors. Finally, the slave trade left a negative legacy on both sides of the Atlantic. The Africans that were brought to the Americas were forced to labor as slaves while enduring some of the most inhumane treatment imaginable. Those who remained, however, were left to mourn the loss of their friends and relatives that were taken away. A handful of African traders and rulers may have gained some wealth from the slave trade, but overall it was a very negative event for Africa. There were African kingdoms such as the Congo Kingdom that eventually fell due to the onslaught brought about by the slave trade. We often think of the negative impact that the slave trade had on those who were captured, but the slave trade was also devastating for those who escaped being captured as well. So they got fucked up too. That's why I make it a point to say, when you say Africans sold other Africans, that's a generalization in multiple ways, yo, because that's not putting in the cultural context. They didn't sell their own people. They weren't looking at it as, yo, I'm African, you African, but I'm going to sell your ass. Like, they weren't looking at it like that. And also, hold on 1 second, y'all. Yeah, man. That's crazy. And I forgot what the hell I was gonna say. Hold on, let me see what y'all talking about. Now, one time have we said everybody did anything? When you say Africans sold other Africans, that's an overgeneralization, though. That's an overgeneralization. Yeah. Using the term African is a generalization. In this conversation, is making it that type of rhetoric is the type of rhetoric that causes a disconnect between African Americans and continental Africans. So it was a very, very select few that had a hand in participating in this. And when we say that, people that don't know any better, I don't know if you know any better or not. I'm just saying that people that don't know any better would take that and run with it. F them Africans. We ain't Africans. What they did with me, they sold us. Like, no, bro. Everybody wanted the king. Everybody wanted a trader, meaning a trader as a merchant. Yeah, nobody asked me, but they ain't got to. This is me pointing out that Sean was on point when he said this and when he said that. You mad because I'm backing up my bro? That's crazy. Maybe hold on. Maybe you want to hear it from the white man.
Historically, slavery is something that people inflict on others, right? You don't, generally speaking, enslave people like yourself. Now, how those borders are drawn may change. So if you go back to ancient Athens, for example, it would have been rare for an Athenian to enslave another Athenian, but he would have had no qualms about enslaving a Spartan or a Corinthian or whatever. There's a kind of notion that you'll hear a lot of people say that Africans enslaved their own people. And in fact, they didn't. In our imagination today, this is...
And in fact, they didn't. You know what I'm saying? Hold on, let me run it back. Maybe you got to hear it from the white man.
Kind of notion that you'll hear a lot of people say that Africans enslaved their own people. And in fact, they didn't. In our imagination today, this is one kind of notion that you'll hear a lot of people say that Africans enslaved their own people. And in fact, they didn't. Africans enslaved their own people. And in fact, they didn't. In our imagination today, this is one place inhabited by one race of people. But that wouldn't have made much sense to people at the time. That Africa was and is a dizzyingly diverse continent with literally thousands of distinct ethnic and linguistic groups. And so there's conflict and contestation between those groups, and that grows dramatically. That conflict grows dramatically in the course of the centuries of the slave trade.
Who said that? Are you asking who said that? Chef said that. Sosa said that. Yo, pseudo killer brothers said that multiple times, bro. And if you denying that they said that, we can always come back and show the receipts. I just didn't feel like going through all them fucking 9-10 hour videos and all that. But if it's an issue where you feel like y'all didn't say that, then we got receipts. We got CVS receipts. You know how long them motherfuckers is. See what I'm saying? So when you say stuff like that, you are giving a lending hand to these oppressive Europeans that we sometimes call crackers, you're giving a lending hand to their racist white supremacist rhetoric. That shit is pushing us back intellectually 50, 60 years, if not more. This is why cultural context, historical context is key. This is why you don't want to skip out on context and just say, yeah, we don't need all that. Research methodology, what? Who does that? Like, yeah, we do that. We do that. We add historical and cultural context. We add fucking research methodology. We add all that. We do that. Because if not, you're not going to understand history. You're going to be looking at history, a historical event, or a historical phenomena in modern eyes, and that just don't work. That just don't work. Yeah, you did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. And I'll come back tomorrow and show that. Or matter of fact, we can post it on. I don't need to come back just for that. We can post. I can tag you on Facebook. I can tag Sosa. Me and Sosa friends on Facebook. Me and Chef ain't, but I know his page. It's no problem, bro. It's no problem whatsoever. Y'all said that. And it wasn't just one time. It wasn't just 2 times. It was multiple times. So that's crazy that you would say that. Like, you wasn't on all those shows the whole time. So maybe you missed it, bro. Maybe you missed it. I literally heard them say this multiple times with my own ears. So, yo, it is what it is. I didn't go into, again, for the 3rd time, I didn't go to extensive detail because it's crazy that I have to have this conversation with people and let people know that, yo, saying Africans sold Africans or they sold their own people is not proper. It's misnomer and is not being put into historical context. So therefore, it is incorrect. It's a half truth, which is a damn lie. Yeah, I get that you didn't say it, Corey. I'm not saying that you said it. I'm saying your pseudo killer family said it. So if you want to hold that stripe for them, then cool. If not, then don't worry about it. This ain't for you. Bro, I'm not finna go searching for the clip right now, but I tell you what, I'll look for it tonight and we can pull it up on y'all tomorrow. I'll look for it tonight. I'll look for them tonight. I'm gonna at least find one. I can't promise you all of them. Because again, y'all make 9-10 hour videos, and that you crazy if you think I'm finna go through 9 or 10 hours multiple times looking for one comment. But yeah, y'all said it, bro. Y'all said it on my mama, and you ain't gotta believe me. I will show you the receipts. It's no problem. It's no issue. It's no issue whatsoever. It's no issue whatsoever. Yeah, man. Y'all said this. Y'all just gotta hold that L. Y'all just gotta hold that L. It's no problem, bro. I done held the L before. Y'all also gotta hold the L that about the slave economies, pre-Arab and European. Right? Y'all gotta hold that L too. Queen Nzinga will go down in history as somebody who fought the Portuguese to stop the slave trade. I gotta hold that L. I gotta hold that L, man. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy. And this whole conversation started with slave economies. Y'all didn't have no leeway in that, so y'all hopped into a whole different topic a whole different subject and start trying to charge us for a bunch of stuff that we didn't even say. Now y'all acting like we twisted the conversation. So this is what I pose. I can't speak for my other brothers. All I can do is speak for me. I pose that we should go back and start from after we done dealing with his nigga, because we already like deep into that. Sean been beating y'all over the head with that. So what I pose is we go back to the initial conversation, which is slave economies in indigenous African systems before Europeans, before Arab, before Islam, before Christianity. Can y'all show that? Because y'all made that claim. Chef made that claim. And we could go back. That's on record too. Y'all made that claim. But once you see that it was no leeway in that, y'all abandoned that point and hopped on to another point. I give y'all this, bro. Y'all smooth with the transitions. Y'all smooth with it. That's why if you go back and listen to the first show, the title is called African Slavery. Everybody's making their opening statements. And they got around to me and I'm like, yo, y'all come back to me because I'm confused. I don't know what the hell y'all talking about. We done went to 3 different places already. And that was the first video. Now, since that first video, we done went to 5, 6 more other places. Like, y'all conversation all over the place. And then y'all be wondering why I be in the chat and not coming on the panel, because it's confusion. It's total confusion. We can't just talk about one point, not come to a conclusion on that, but immediately hop on to another. That's a pseudo tactic. That's what pseudos do. But it's not. I mean, it's nothing personal for me. It's all about the information, bro. Y'all still the bros. Y'all still the homies, and it's all love. But you know, as far as this African history and culture, we the big brothers. Sometimes the big brothers gotta get a little brothers a spanking. But yeah, man, I appreciate everybody for coming through. We will continue this if need be. I believe Sean will be continuing in Zynga, and what he doing on that, doing a great job, awesome job on that, man. Bringing a lot of information, a lot of teaching a lot of people a lot of things that they didn't know. But yeah, man, salute to the pseudo killers, the PSU EDO killers. Yeah, tell Sheffrin to start spelling the name right. But it's all love, man. It's all love and fun. But yeah, when y'all say that, man, y'all pushing us back. Y'all pushing us back decades. We supposed to be advancing the information and standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, not just standing on their shoulders, but standing on their shoulders to look further, to advance the information, not standing on their shoulders to fall backwards. And when you say shit like that, that's what that's what we doing, man. We falling backwards. I don't know if anybody else coming later on, but if not, man, we probably come back tomorrow. Peace and love.